I can tell you Republican conference meetings, and I've been president now for almost a year, at virtually every single time we meet, this topic comes up. How are we going to change the fiscal path that we're on? So there is a very, very strong sense of urgency on the part of Republican members of this committee and beyond. There's also, let's face it, a very, very serious concern that the alternative to the supercommittee's success, the sequestration of funds, hits the defense budget way too hard. And there are a lot of Republicans who are very concerned about that, and that created another incentive for us to try to find an agreement. On the other side, I think there were forces pulling the Democrats away from an agreement. Let's face it, we have a presidential campaign that is now premised on the idea that the president is running against the do-nothing Congress. Never mind that half of the Congress is controlled by Democrats. That is the fundamental message of his campaign, and if the Select Committee had come to a great bipartisan agreement that could pass both houses and be signed into law, it would rather muddle the message that the President is trying to run on. In addition, let's face it, many of the Democrats have long hoped to dramatically cut the defense budget. Well, that's exactly what happens in the sequestration. So there was certainly a segment of that caucus that finds the alternative to success perfectly acceptable. And finally, there is also, I think we've all seen a mood in the country that, on the part of the far left anyway, that productive people need to be punished with a big tax increase. And so that voice was present within the Democratic caucus as well. I do want to stress there were some Democrats on the committee who I think definitely wanted to accomplish something. I just think they found it impossible to break from the left wing of their own caucus. I think going forward, you know, I think it's clear what we need to do. We need to focus on maximizing economic growth. We need to focus on transforming the big drivers of our deficits into a sustainable fashion. And I guess I'm going to have to vote soon, huh?
4 minutes.
4 minutes.
According to Leader
A lot of time for questions here, I see. But let me just say, I mean, I think the big questions here about the size of government and the role of government and the questions that divided us at some level will await another election cycle for further clarity and guidance from the voters. But in the meantime, there are some things we need to do. I think, number one, we absolutely need to stick to the $1.2 trillion in spending cuts that are scheduled. I think it's important that they be reconfigured so that they don't land disproportionately on our defense budget as they're currently scheduled, but we need to make sure that they happen. Second thing is we ought to accept that, well, maybe we can't persuade our Democratic friends to completely reform the tax code. Let's do the pieces that we can do. Let's try to move to a territorial system if we can. Let's close some of the egregious loopholes like the ethanol features that we voted successfully on in the Senate. On the spending side, likewise, if we couldn't agree to a big grand bargain, let's take the individual items for which there really ought to be broad bipartisan consensus, reducing corporate welfare, for instance, agricultural subsidies, even asking federal employees to contribute a little bit more for their retirement benefits. These are things that both sides ought to be able to agree on. I would say if there's a silver lining to the failure of the committee, perhaps it is that we discovered, or for some of us rediscovered, that there are a great deal of places where we can have very substantial savings for taxpayers. By all means, let's do what we can. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Pat. Let's continue this in the future.
Okay.
Thank you, my friend.
Yep.
We are all governed by somebody else's schedule.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being with us, Senator. We look forward to welcoming you back to continue this dialogue in the very near future.
Thanks very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we stand adjourned.